Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about this op-ed from Bernie Marcus, the co-founder of Home Depot, last week. Just excellent, telling his story of being fired from his gig at the age of 49. And that's when he had this idea to open a hardware store, a lumber yard, and a garden store all in one. What you now know today as Home Depot, because he grew one store in Georgia to 2,000 locations across the country. He wrote that the Home Depot almost went bankrupt several times in its first decade, and today's policy environment would have tipped us into insolvency as it does countless entrepreneurs each year. Not only would he have not been able to grow Home Depot into 2,000 locations, Home Depot arguably wouldn't have even made it, according to him. He writes, the biggest victim of bad government policy, biggest victims, aren't the elite. They'll always be able to get into good schools and get their foot in the door of corporate America. The people hurt most by big government are those who lack advantages in becoming economically independent, and that's disproportionately minorities, which is part of the reason he founded the Job Creators Network. Our next guest is the president and CEO of said Job Creators Network, also our friend Gary Rabine Paving and other businesses here in Illinois, part of this Job Creators Network group. President and CEO, he is Alfredo Ortiz. He's got a new book, The Real Race Revolutionaries, How Minority Entrepreneurship Can Overcome America's Racial and Economic Divides. Alfredo Ortiz, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So the Bernie Marcus story is a powerful one, and before that op-ed was published, he also expressed, as much as he provided the example, he also expressed some real frustration beyond just the politicians, sort of the culture in part aided and abetted by the politicians, where people don't want to work, and he's more than a little bit exercised about that. The perspective of Job Creators Network and what you all are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an incredible story of that Bernie shares, and I couldn't be more fortunate and honored to work for such an amazing entrepreneur and philanthropist, like Bernie. And but his story's amazing, right? Because he grew up in the tenements of New Jersey and grew up poor, and as you said, he went along the way of the corporate world and got fired at 49. But yet he had a vision, he had a dream, he had a belief in himself, and he took the chance. He took the gamble. And in 52, he started Home Depot with one store in Atlanta, and today 450,000 people roughly are employed by the Home Depot, and it really is an inspiring, amazing story. And I always say that really only this country can that happen. But, he also says that starting actually under Barack Obama, if he had to, roll out Home Depot in that environment of high taxes and high regulation, he would have never been able to do it. And, unfortunately, the Democrats like doing some of these policies and not thinking about the unintended consequences. I mean, if you think of Dodd-Frank, for example, you had about 1,800 community banks that went out of business because they just couldn't deal with the high regulations that most large banks had no problem dealing with because they had the wherewithal to do that. And guess where most of those community banks went out of business? They were in communities of high minority representation.
And guess where the plumber who wants to start a plumbing business gets his financing? A community bank.
Exactly, the community bank. And forget about the small business, the small business group of the U.S. bases. I mean, that's just impossible there to get a loan. So the community banks were really so important. So we're pushing, for example, really fintech now to try to make fill the gap with those community banks that just are non-existent. And so we believe that this idea that the Democrats love pushing, which my test, but this entire book actually really started as kind of an outgrowth of testimony that I offered before the full House Ways and Means Committee last spring in a hearing on minority entrepreneurship, and it was pretty funny because the Democrat members and witnesses argued for more big government policies to overcome supposed structural racism holding minorities back. So surprise, surprise, right? Everything's about racism. Everything goes back to that. And what's that old saying, right? When the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I mean, that was definitely in display there. And of course, I countered that reducing the hurdles to entrepreneurship by having the government do less, not more, is actually the best way to empower minorities to actually improve their economic outcomes.
It's just difficult, guys like the CEO of Goya Foods, Robert Unanue, says the same things, and then he gets pilloried. I mean, it's amazing. This is like they're focused on minority entrepreneurship. They're focused on extending opportunities to people that don't have them, and yet then the government class comes in and says, that's just a pipe dream. You can't do this, even though it's been done clearly, and it's just a challenge to get over that hurdle, it seems, where the politician is here with a check today and the entrepreneur is here with an opportunity to build something for tomorrow. It's a tough sell for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, I know Bob Unanue well because I was actually a commissioner alongside with him at the White House initiative for excellence in education for Hispanics. So we actually work together on that, and it's basically trying to make sure that we have an environment that produces positive outcomes for entrepreneurs across this country as much as possible. And so it's just a shame because whenever you have this kind of narrative coming from folks like myself, it always tries to get squashed. I mean, in fact, that testimony was actually pretty funny to watch because they said that they were troubled by the rhetoric and claimed that I was inappropriate and ignorant to argue that minorities can overcome their circumstances for entrepreneurship. Let me tell you, I grew up poor.
Yeah.
My mom was a housekeeper. My dad was a tailor, right? We went through trash cans, right? Going through aluminum cans and newspapers, finding those, going over to the YMCA, cashing those in, and that was our grocery for the week. Yet I was ignorant and inappropriate.
Well, see, it seems to me like this is an example, it seems to me, where maybe some of these button-down business guys need to get a little bit more ornery and say, how dare you patronize me? Who the frack are you to tell me or anybody else what we can or can't do? I think there needs to be, maybe I err too much on the side of hostility, but I just think there needs to be more hostility that is directed at people who are so patronizing, who have this false notion of white man's burden or politician's burden with respect to everybody, but particularly minorities.
Well, and that is actually one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I was actually pretty bothered walking out of that 4-hour testimony. I was the sole Republican witness, and so when I was thinking about these words, I mean, just really bothered me because, first of all, I am an actual living example of where it did help. I had two small businesses, actually, that I started in Atlanta, a little consulting company and a construction company. And I have to tell you, that really was able to launch my success. And I was, standing next to the President of the United States as a commissioner, like I just said, along with Bob Unanue there and others. I mean, where else but in this country can you go from picking trash as a kid with your mom to standing next to the President of the United States? I mean, so it's unbelievable. In the book, we lay out some great data points, but I just want to highlight one, if I may. A Congressional Black Caucus Foundation study found that the median net worth for black business owners is 12 times higher than for black non-business owners. In other words, black entrepreneurs more than eliminate that racial income and wealth gaps, earning and saving far more than median white households. I mean, that's just one little fact that's in there that really pushes back on this narrative from the left that everything is about government handouts and reparations.
And recently you wrote, beside your book, you wrote an article in the Washington Times where you talked about an encounter you had with a book at an Atlanta bookstore. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was interesting, right? So they were really talking about, two women and how the real revolutionaries were, talking about LGBTQ and really pushing for that, and that being kind of the answer. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, gosh, the answer really is about small businesses. I mean, having spent 10 years running this organization, I've seen that. I've seen that firsthand. I mean, the majority of people that I've talked to on the road, at this point, thousands of small business owners that I've run into across the country. This is why they come here. I mean, you think about it. They flee their socialist countries. I mean, two good friends of mine, and also great entrepreneurs themselves. One from Nicaragua, one from Venezuela. They came here with nothing, right? And they started businesses, and they had that opportunity. And that's the one thing that we also talked about is it's about equal opportunity, right? That's what I think we as a country promise. We've never promised equal outcomes. So this whole idea that the left has of the quality of outcomes, I don't even know where that comes from.
So from your perspective, what are the couple of things that really break through? What maybe there's examples from the work that you want to do on a daily basis that really pierce through and get people interested in being entrepreneurships or get them on the path to being successful entrepreneurs. What does it take that's replicable?
Well, I mean, the one thing I think that all entrepreneurs, and myself included there, like I said, I own my two small businesses myself. It's hard work, right? Grit, belief in yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, these are the characteristics that are inherent in every entrepreneur.
But
how have an idea.
Sorry to interrupt, but how do you transmit them where the concept hasn't even been introduced to some of these neighborhoods? It doesn't. It's not part of the K through 12 curriculum or conversation. It's not happening in some of these communities that are struggling with violence and poor schools and so forth. How do you get to the future, these next generations that are coming up and open their eyes to these opportunities you're describing?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I mean, I think if we look in all of our communities, the heartbeat of our communities are the small business owners. So I think what I would do is I would encourage the small business owners themselves to become a more vocal force. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in this whole cancel culture, a lot of times they're just now afraid to speak up. But we really have to depend on our small businesses to speak out. I mean, in Chicago, for example, look how many small businesses are hurt by the crime that happens in Chicago. I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, a lot of these businesses are closing up shop because they can't keep up with the crime. And it's keeping their customers away. They're losing money. They're losing inventory, right? And so they really do need to speak out because it's the government kind of, either too much government, right, or they're not doing enough to protect their small businesses, right, and to have safe communities. I mean, I always say when it's easier to get fentanyl on our streets than it is to get baby formula on the shelves of our grocery stores, we have a real problem in this country.
I wonder if this model has any application. I always think of, in this topic, I think of the Julius Rosenwald, the Rosenwald schools, where Julius Rosenwald, who is the CEO of Sears Roebuck, partnered with Booker T. Washington to build schools throughout the South 100 years ago to educate minority children in an era of government-sponsored segregation. And the success that those kids had by getting access to those schools and getting a real education that prepared them to be, independent Americans. Maybe I know they're business incubators. We have one on the west side of the city that's shown some promise. Is there more of that infrastructure that needs to be built? More of the partnership with the successful folks building incubators where the aspiring entrepreneurs can have access to the things they need to get a business off the ground? Is that something that makes sense? A model?
It really does, and it's interesting. We talk about a little bit the whole debate that happened between Du Bois and Washington here. Du Bois really becoming a major part of the socialist movement in the country, and of course, Washington talking about entrepreneurialism and capitalism, really, and education being the real way of curing that racial divide. And so, but I actually think that is a great model we were talking about. And Gary Rabine, you mentioned him at the beginning of the show. He's actually a board member of ours and a good friend of mine. This is something that we need to do. And I know that in his model, that's just something that he encourages. He looks for high school students, college students, right? Really encouraging them to, to be part and mentor them, to succeed. I mean, I think we really need to have more of that in our high schools. Unfortunately, that keeps getting stripped out. And so, again, I keep urging these small business owners on a local basis, on a community basis. It's wonderful that they help fund, soccer teams and little leagues and stuff like that. But having these entrepreneurship centers, work centers, where they can learn what it is to be an entrepreneur, right? Where they can even maybe help get funding for an idea. I mean, sometimes these ideas don't take a lot of money. They just need some mentorship, someone who's already been there, done that. I mean, if we can actually think of Shark Tank, I think everybody has probably seen Shark Tank at some point. If we can make that model, but make it more of an educational model on a community basis, I think we could really be onto something.
He is Alfredo Ortiz. He's the president and CEO of the Job Creators Network. His new book, The Real Race Revolutionaries, How Minority Entrepreneurship Can Overcome America's Racial and Economic Divides. Alfredo Ortiz, thanks for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Attention entrepreneurs and growth-oriented individuals looking to learn. Multimillionaire venture capitalist John Sarasani is helping the masses with his podcast that focuses on the business community. No longer do you need to sit at work each day waiting for your cost of living to go up 3% annually. Instead, give yourself a 2,000% raise and go to work for yourself. Get all the info at 2000percentraise.com, where John shares his entertaining insight and features successful business owners, celebrities, and investor guests like Tracy Tudor from Bravo's $1 Million Listing, Darren Rovell from ESPN and Action Sports Network, and multimillionaire bodybuilding.com founder Ryan DeLuca. Go to 2000percentraise.com, get on the email list, and find podcast links. Or search for 2000% Raise on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or any major podcast platform. Follow at John Sarasani on TikTok and Instagram for some quick clips of the business lessons he teaches. New informative content every week. Visit 2000percentraise.com today and start working for yourself.
Gentlemen, a lot of people talking about testosterone, but do your homework and be sure to go to a provider you can trust. I recommend my friends at Low T Center. It's where I get my levels checked and have been for the past 8 years. Low T Center exclusively specializes in men's wellness. They check all your levels, not just your testosterone, and determine the cause of any symptoms you're having, and whether you're a candidate for low T or something else like low thyroid or sleep apnea. Typically, their annual health assessment is completely covered by health insurance, and they check everything, including PSA, your prostate levels, as well as thyroid, liver and kidney function, cholesterol, glucose levels, and more. Low T